Though my analyses of Sedriss has changed somewhat, I stand by my original verdict on Asajj Ventress versus Sedriss. Sedriss employs the strength-based heavy offensive fighting style that Ventress is specifically weak against. His performance level was sufficient to give Luke Skywalker pause, and he is an unyielding aggressor who will go kamikaze if necessary. Though he wouldn't overpower Ventress as handily as Anakin Skywalker did, I have no doubt that he would overpower her. As to the changes in my analyses of Sedriss, it will still be a three-way compromise between the Dark Empire 2 comics and radio play and his character sheet in the Star Wars role-playing game. But instead of using the stats presented in the Jedi Academy Training Manual, as I did previously, I will be using the sheet presented in the Dark Side Sourcebook, as I found it to be much more comprehensive. My reconciliation between the two versions of his battle with Luke Skywalker presented in the comics and the radio play remains the same. They engaged and fought blade to blade, with Luke ending the bout with telekinesis. My analyses of Sylvar will be drawn almost exclusively from her appearance in the Tales of the Jedi comic series, though I will be referencing such sources as the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide and the Old Republic Encyclopedia for information on Cathar species traits. So with all of that out of the way, let us begin. Sylvar, the Jedi Huntress, and Sedriss, Emperor Palpatine's chargeman. If these two noted warriors were to meet in single combat, who would win? Native to the planet of the same name, the Cathar were a race of humanoid felines, renowned for their passion and their prowess as close-quarters fighters, thanks in large part to their prominent claws and fangs. However, though their society fostered high moral values, they struggled with the savage instincts of their predatory past. Sylvar and her mate, Credo, defined the dichotomy of their race. She overcame her anger and remained true to the Jedi way, while he gave in to his weakness and followed the Sith. Though Sylvar's originally brown fur had turned white with age, her performance levels appeared in no way hampered, and she continued to outperform her fellow Jedi, leveraging her speed and strength in a frenzy of aggression, frequently mauling enemies with her claws. However, though she was a heavy hitter, she could be overpowered. In contrast to the lighter garb that characterized her youth, Sylvar's typical post-war loadout consisted of a tight-fitting leather jacket, possibly armor weave, with plated pauldrons and gauntlets, a turban and cape, and military-style trousers and boots. Though Sylvar did ultimately overcome her anger, it was not without great struggle, and she remained hardened and unyielding. When Cathar mate, they mate for life, and Credo hadn't fathered any children when he died. Sylvar has no prospect of family or heirs. Her legacy is her reputation, and she will no doubt uphold it to the last and die fighting. Though their original homeworld was lost to time, humanity was the most common species in the galaxy, the baseline against which all others were compared. A distant descendant of Ulic Qel-Droma, Kaga Lock's latent force sensitivity made him a recruitment target for the Empire, but his violence and insubordination led to his incarceration. As an alternative to execution, Emperor Palpatine offered Locke the option of fighting for his life against the Emperor himself. Locke accepted and was immediately crushed to the ground by Palpatine's telekinesis, who proceeded to gain Locke's undying loyalty through torment and fear. A conventional humanoid standing 1.8 meters in height, Sedriss boasted an athletic build, though he was afflicted by minor dark side degradation, displaying deathly pale skin and red eyes. His prime attributes were strength and agility, leveraged through springing attacks, nimble evasions, and cleaving blade work. He wore a form-fitting armored bodysuit beneath his clothing, topped off with what appeared to be a heavy-duty armor-weave vest and a codpiece. It was a duelist's loadout, balancing maximized defensive coverage with minimal weight and encumbrance. The cause of Kaga Lock's insubordination was his inability to respect or take orders from individuals that he could easily kill, murdering his Imperial handlers out of sheer contempt. By initiating Sedriss into the dark side with such a visceral display of power, Palpatine established himself as a superior worthy of respect and awe, effectively making himself into Sedriss's alpha. Defined by this undying loyalty and his iron will, Sedriss served Palpatine to the last, and died fighting against Jedi Master Ood Banar. Though Sedriss is clearly younger, age has not slowed Sylvar in the slightest, and she maintains a level of speed and strength that is, at the very least, comparable to Sedriss's, and very likely greater. Though Sylvar has been overpowered by forceful hand-to-hand combat techniques, Sedriss is primarily a duelist, and hasn't demonstrated any dedicated physical combat skills. For this reason, Sylvar enjoys an unchallenged supremacy in this field, thanks to her Cathar species traits. However, just like Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma, Sedriss is at a disadvantage, but by no means overmatched. His focused application of strength allows him to hold his ground, while his perseverance allows him to recover from setbacks, and he is just as willing to fight to the death as Sylvar. But this doesn't change the fact that she can almost literally chew him up and spit him out with physical combat. Advantage to Sylvar. Apprentice to the famed Jedi Weapon Master Vodosiask Boss, Sylvar's training partners were her eventual mate Credo and the arrogant prodigy Exar Kun. Their rivalry influenced Sylvar's development, as she frequently responded to Kun's posturing with aggression, their sparring sessions turning into slugging matches. Armed with a standard Jedi lightsaber fitted with a magenta Adegan crystal during the later stages of her career, Sylvar was a nimble power duelist, closing in with running charges and acrobatics, then unloading on the opposition with rapid-fire cleaving power attacks. She reinforced this heavy offensive technique with active defense, meeting attacks with attacks, and fully integrating physical combat into her style, mauling enemies with her claws. Given the broad knowledge base possessed by Vodo Boss and the innovations of Exar Kun, Sylvar was clearly provided with extensive training, no doubt specializing in multiple forms. Her strength-based dueling style pointed to skill in Gemso, likely supplemented by Shien to facilitate blast deflection. Her wide cleaving strikes and her willingness to utterly release herself into the Force closely aligned with Shi-Cho, the determination form. The overall focus and aggression with which she fought suggested Juyo, the ferocity form. Sylvar's determined assault was optimized for overpowering opponents with terrifying speed, while her perseverance under fire allowed her to maintain her assault in the face of staunch resistance, all brought to a deadly point by her focused aggression and ferocity. In her final sparring match with Exar Kun, she matched him blade to blade, and scored a significant hit with her claws, though she was ultimately overpowered via physical combat. During the Great Sith War, she acquitted herself extremely well on the battlefield, casually slaughtering numerous Krath war droids and Massassi warriors. Though the Ulic Qel-Droma she engaged on Renvar was stripped of his Force connection, his skill with the lightsaber was not to be discounted, and pressuring such an opponent was no mean feat. Prior to his Force training under Palpatine, Kaga Lock was a soldier of fortune. His character sheet credits him with numerous conventional weapon proficiencies, no doubt picked up during this phase of his career. However, as a Dark Jedi, Sedriss was a swordsman through and through, wielding a standard lightsaber, its bloodshine blade indicating a synthetic focusing crystal at its heart. The attack options and feats listed on his character sheet include Cleave, Power Attack, Spring Attack, Mobility, and Dodge, which paints a picture of a committed though agile power duelist, alternating strength-based blade work with nimble evasions, which is generally corroborated by the artwork in Dark Empire 2. However, despite the physical nature of his fighting style, there is no evidence of dedicated hand-to-hand combat training. Despite this, I regard Sedriss's closest analog as being Darth Maul, as it stands to reason that Palpatine would have trained both of his students in much the same manner. Sedriss's conventional weapons training provides a similar practical foundation as Maul's Teräs Käsi training, with Nyman as the likely foundation for his lightsaber training, possibly supplemented by Jarkai as well. However, rather than use this broad skill set as the building blocks for Juyo as Maul did, I believe Sedriss instead followed in the footsteps of his idol, Darth Vader, and dedicated himself to the Perseverance form Jem So. Sedriss's approach to single combat mirrored his military strategy. He was a conservative instigator, opening with a restrained aggression intended to provoke a response, but keeping most of his strength in reserve, allowing him to assess the threat and escalate as needed. He casually slaughtered the treacherous Darkside adepts Nefta and Sa-D, resisting their Darkside magics and overbearing them with lightsaber combat. More compelling by far was his confrontation with Luke Skywalker, battling the Jedi Master to a stalemate, with Skywalker choosing to subdue him with telekinesis rather than continue the fight. As I see it, the attributes of Bloodshine synthetic crystals don't represent an advantage so much as a trade-off. The increased cutting power and blade breaking potential counterbalanced by reduced handling and blade instability. For this reason, the mechanics of Sedriss's lightsaber don't constitute a meaningful advantage. Otherwise, both wielded standard weapons, simple, versatile, functionally identical. I regard both Sylvar and Sedriss to be athletic Gemso specialists in the mold of Anakin Skywalker, supplementing this primary discipline with a firm foundation in the other forms, blending these various techniques into a singular, high-performance fighting style. For this reason, they were quite evenly matched, equaling one another in strength and aggression. Sylvar's tactics of meeting attacks with attacks allows her to set up for follow-up strikes by staggering the opponent or shunting aside their blade, while Sedriss's evasions allow for dodge and counter combos. However, Sylvar's integration of physical combat provides her with an additional avenue of attack, one that Sedriss has no answer for, given his lack of training in that area, leaving Sylvar free to maul him with impunity. To put it bluntly, Sylvar was a fully realized martial artist with an excellent balance between body and weapon, where Sedriss was a pure weapons specialist. Furthermore, though Sedriss was a battle-hardened mercenary when his training began, his dueling experience was extremely limited, with his success instead predicated on the skill he developed through training. Sylvar, on the other hand, had survived altercations with Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma, the two greatest swordsmen of their generation, and boasted a similarly comprehensive level of training from her era's reigning Jedi weapon master. Advantage to Sylvar. The moral values of Cathar society meshed extremely well with Jedi philosophy, which led many Force-sensitive Cathar to join the Order, though Sylvar was one of the many who struggled with the innate bloodlust that ran in opposition to Jedi pacifism. Exacerbating these tendencies was her proximity to Exar Kun, who antagonized her during their Jedi apprenticeship, murdering their teacher Vodobos after his fall, and directly causing Kratos' betrayal and death by seducing him to the dark side. Sylvar came out of the Great Sith War embittered by loss and hungry for vengeance. The only thing that kept her on the straight and narrow was her commitment to Jedi ideology and her refusal to slaughter a defenseless opponent. Sylvar was a dedicated physical combat specialist brought up by a Jedi weapon master, which strongly suggested that she trained as a Jedi Guardian. Force-based physical enhancement complemented her athleticism and her Cathar attributes, though her savage nature meant that she often found herself dipping into Force rage, gaining strength by riding the storm. However, all of Sylvar's demonstrations of power pertained almost exclusively to the Sense branch, likely an area that Sylvar specialized in to bolster physical combat and capitalize on her predatory senses. She demonstrated a strong sensitivity to telepathic and empathic impressions, perceiving Exar Kun's Force scream when he fell to the dark side and identifying its source, detecting Vima Sunrider's distress when she nearly fell into a sun, and gaining a basic understanding of her situation, and finally, tracking Ulic Qel-Droma's location on Ren Var. Her ability to remain undetected by Nomi Sunrider, also on planet, until she had engaged Qel-Droma indicates some ability to conceal her own Force signature from other Jedi. Her actions on Ryloth pointed to a potent empathic influence when she chose to resolve a clan dispute through violence and came close to instigating a riot. However, the only time Sylvar employed her powers actively was when she was participating in group efforts, projecting her strength to reinforce the walls of light used to contain Ulic Qel-Droma and later Exar Kun. She has never been depicted employing active Force abilities, instead allowing her lightsaber to do most of the talking. To be fair, the only person who overpowered Sylvar was Kun himself, the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith, so there is no indication that Sylvar was weak against Force attacks, but she wasn't bringing anything to the table herself. As part of his contribution to the Telos Holocron, Emperor Palpatine included his appraisal of Sedriss, and I quote, "As leader of my dark side adepts, Military Executor Sedriss has been most loyal, and is commended for reviving me here on Biss. But for all his usefulness, Sedriss is only a moderate Force sensitive, a capable errand boy, but hardly the stuff of a Sith apprentice." However, in contrast to Palpatine's lackluster opinion, the circumstances of Sedriss's death point to significant talent and potential. After his failed engagement with Luke Skywalker on Ossus, Sedriss attempted to regain control of the situation by taking a hostage, only for the tree he was backed up against to come alive and attack him, revealing itself to be the ancient Neti Jedi Ud Banar. Sensing this to be his last battle, Sedriss gave himself over to the dark side and began drawing energy from the charged atmosphere of Ossus. Banar met this attack by drawing upon the internal power of the planet itself. The clash of their energies played out as a matter-antimatter reaction, and both were annihilated. But as compelling as this display of Sedriss's potential was, the fact remains that this potential was largely untapped. Continuing to parallel Darth Maul, Sedriss was a physical combat specialist, describing himself as a dark side warrior. Accordingly, he demonstrated a strong practical focus, his most developed abilities falling within the control and alter branches. He reinforced physical enhancement with Force Rage, bolstering his combat performance by channeling the dark side, while balancing it out with Battle Mind, maintaining his focus and composure in the heat of combat. His aptitude with telekinesis was raw yet powerful, hammering foes with Force Push, throttling them with Force Grip, as well as employing a more general ability to lift and move objects. However, Sedriss' sense abilities were unexceptional, though we can infer the low-level precognition necessary to enable lightsaber combat. He has been credited only with a simple mind trick and a general force perception. Given his ability to resist the dark side magics of Nefta and Sa-D, and his overwhelming emphasis on lightsaber combat, Sedriss likely functioned as a low-level consular hunter, using passive defensive abilities to neutralize their powers while dominating them in physical combat. Sedriss occasionally incorporated telekinesis into his early offensive probing, assessing the opponent's strength by attempting to throttle them with force grip. In this manner, he successfully penetrated Cam Solusar's force barrier, forcing Luke Skywalker to extend his own defenses to protect his partner. Though Sedriss was soundly overpowered by Skywalker, this is no sign of weakness, given Skywalker's godly level of strength in the Force. Both Sylvar and Sedriss were physical combat specialists who employed the Force purely as a supplement, but where Sedriss was deliberately held back by Palpatine, Sylvar chose to put all of her eggs in one basket. Sedriss' skill set was basic, but he still possesses confirmed active abilities, where almost all of Sylvar's demonstrated powers are purely passive. In the control branch, both relied on physical enhancement to enable lightsaber combat, and both bolstered this ability with Force Rage, but Sedriss balanced this out with Battle Mind, where Sylvar struggled to contain the violence. Sylvar's telepathic abilities are more impressive, but irrelevant here. Sedriss' telekinesis, on the other hand, is a major asset, thanks in large part to Sylvar's lack of demonstrated ability in this area. However, though Sylvar didn't employ active telekinesis, I don't believe that her defenses were in any way lacking, and I don't see Sedriss as capable of overpowering her as Exar Kun did. That being said, an abrupt force push would still be useful for staggering or otherwise subverting Sylvar, and there is the possibility that Sedriss may bypass her TK barrier with a thrown object. Sylvar is by no means a poor force wielder, but she is over-specialized, so dedicated to bolstering her supremacy as a physical combatant that she neglects to capitalize on the Force's potential as a weapon. It really says something that Sedriss, whose development was actively stunted by his master, was still a more potent and well-rounded combative force wielder. Advantage to Sedriss. Sylvar reaped the benefits of Cathar species traits, more than living up to their reputation as superior physical combatants, but struggling with their legacy of savagery and bloodthirst. Though merely human, Sedriss displayed similar violent tendencies, but Palpatine impressed upon him the need for discipline and ruthlessness. Sylvar was a warrior from a warrior race. Sedriss was a killer, plain and simple. However, Sylvar compensated for her lack of discipline with better training, combining a top-notch dueling style honed against one of the greatest swordsmen of her generation with a massive advantage as a physical combatant, courtesy of her claws. Sylvar's rage may occasionally get her in over her head, but in a direct engagement with a fellow offensive heavyweight, it provides strength and focus. As I stated previously, Sylvar is a fully realized martial artist, where Sedriss is a pure weapon specialist. But as a result, Sedriss still matches Sylvar's lightsaber skill, and compensates for his physical disadvantage by developing his force abilities. The problem is that he still overemphasizes physical combat, and doesn't employ his powers as actively as he could. If Sedriss used the Starkiller strategy of aggressively spamming his force abilities, I could see him subverting and overpowering Sylvar, even with his meager toolset. But as it stands, all he would do is delay the inevitable. Sedriss's unyielding commitment may allow him to soldier on to victory against other opponents, but against Sylvar, his refusal to back down would simply play into her claws. I declare Sylvar the victor. And now to the post-mortem analyses, where I provide my overall assessment of both combatants and where they stand relative to other fighters. Starting from the top with Sylvar, I rate her as possessing a Tier 1.5 physique. For reference, Tier 2 represents peak human fitness, where Tier 1 is baseline superhuman. While Sylvar's physical performance level is on par with human, her physiological traits, her claws and fangs, provide a substantial advantage in physical combat. She's not superhuman, but she has a major edge, comparable to such figures as Darth Maul and Shakti. As a lightsaber duelist, I rate Sylvar as a Tier 3, best that can be achieved through specialization in a singular technique, examples including such individuals as Kit Fisto or Saisi Teen. Though Sylvar incorporates physical combat, it's more as a carryover from physical capabilities, and does not represent a higher level of development. It is merely an additional tool. As a Force wielder, I also rate her as a Tier 3. As with her lightsaber skills, the best that can be achieved through focused specialization in a specific skill group, the Sense branch in Sylvar's case. Her development parallels Kit Fisto, who specialized in his aquakinetic talent, but was otherwise completely baseline. Moving on to Sedriss, I rate him as possessing a Tier 2 physique, peak human fitness, placing him alongside such figures as Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu. As a lightsaber duelist, I rate him as a Tier 3. A good analog for Sedriss is TCW Maul. Simply replace Teräs Käsi with conventional weapon proficiencies and Juyo with Gem So. As a Force wielder, I also rate him as a Tier 3. In Sedriss's case, the best that can be achieved through coasting on raw talent, a result of Palpatine stunting his development. Appropriately, this places Sedriss on the level with his effective predecessor, Darth Maul. As overall combatants, both Sylvar and Sedriss are archetypal Tier 3s. Though dedicated adepts who took no shortcuts, their development was determined by their aptitudes, leading them to specialize in singular disciplines. They boasted high performance levels, but their success was predicated on specific attributes and techniques, dominating through the direct application of power rather than general versatility.